So we are talking about human-wildlife conflicts, trends, and the role of fertility control. Before I start, the speakers will come one after the other. They will not introduce the speakers, but you will know who the speakers are from your agenda. So human-wildlife conflicts are increasing worldwide, and that is exactly why we're here. And this is a non-exhaustive list of human-wildlife conflicts, or we can also call them human-wildlife interactions. I would like to give you some examples of these conflicts, and then some examples on how these conflicts are managed traditionally, and finally, why we believe that we should give a chance to fertility control. We don't believe, as Botstiber, we don't believe for a second that fertility control is the only way, but certainly we would like people to consider it, because there are many species and contexts for which it might make sense. So some examples, traffic accidents with deer in the UK. About 2 million deer live in the UK. This is a bit old as information, but we have tens of thousands of accidents every year, hundreds of human injuries and deaths also, and obviously thousands of deer that end up the same way. Very similar for Sweden. So deer, moose, wild boar, this is some recent work from some colleagues in Sweden. Vehicle collisions in Sweden cost about 400 million euros per year. So quite significant economic impact. Beaver. Beaver, economic and ecological impact, and this is an example from Poland. In 2003, there were estimated 40,000 beavers in Poland. 15 years later, there were 100,000 more. And 15 years later, there are some data that suggests in 2019 that the damage, so the cases of damage by beaver, cause 6 million euros in compensation. So again, we are talking about, this is one species only. And remember that beavers are coming back all over Europe. So this is one species in 1 year. I don't have to remind anybody about the pandemic and the fact that human-wildlife interactions are increasing. So a lot of animals are moving into our cities, or maybe our cities are overlapping with what was traditionally some wildlife areas. And likewise, we are moving, there are more people on Earth, so we are moving in the other direction and picking up diseases. And a very good example is, again, the cost of African swine fever. The cost to the pig industry for African swine fever in Romania only is another 400 million euros. So again, we are talking about significant costs. Why are human-wildlife conflicts increasing? Probably too many people. Europe is particularly dense with people. There are a lot of people in Europe. In fact, I was very surprised because I've always thought Southeast Asia is quite high in people's density. Europe is going the same way. But also the number of people living in urban areas has recently surpassed the number of people living in rural areas. And the reason why this is very important is that people living in cities have very little contact with wildlife. They will see a lot of TV program about tigers and elephants probably, but they also have very, very strong views on how wildlife should be managed. And generally these views are non-lethal control. We have created the ideal conditions. There are a number of species that are very happy to use what we are providing for them. Examples are wolves with sheep or cows or cattle. We provide food through our crops. We feed animals, particularly if they're cute. We provide shelter. And we generate a lot of rubbish, and animals are pretty quick to use it. I'm giving an example on wild boar, simply because I've worked with wild boar for many years, but also because if you remember my first slide on human-wildlife conflicts and interactions, the wild boar will tick them all. So this is the number of wild boar harvested by hunters in the last 30 years in 17 European countries. And the country doesn't matter, they're all going up. And they're going up so much that up to 2014, 2015, when we published the paper, France or Germany were culling 500,000 wild boar per year. In 2018, 2019, Germany was culling 800,000 wild boar, 820,000 wild boar per year, and they're still going up. So the methods that we use to manage wildlife populations are two sets: lethal methods and non-lethal methods. So I'll show some slides and this is, believe me, this is not selected evidence. There are a number of instances where I don't think lethal management is working. First point, the number of large game hunters throughout the world, this is in Europe, but throughout the world, is flat or declining. That means that hunters that were able to an extent to keep a lid on wild boar and other deer. By the way, all the graph that you've seen for the wild boar will apply to a number of deer, also deer species, roe deer, red deer across Europe. So the hunters, they were the one that kept, to an extent, this population in check, are becoming an endangered species. So the hunters are going down, and so the gap between the mortality due to the hunter and the growth rate of population is becoming bigger. Culling may not be effective. Again, I'm showing some data from Germany because Germany, we are lucky that collects very good data on a number of wildlife issues. So this is the raccoon. The raccoons are non-native in Europe, come from the States. Germany, until 20 years ago, was culling about 20,000. Now we are about 200,000. And this graph, to me, shows that culling is not working, or certainly is not working to keep the numbers down. Steve Belmain and Jens Jakob will touch on this. This is one slide to say that poisoning also could harm non-target species. And I'm specifically referring to rodenticides. If you are a rat or a mice and you eat a rodenticide, you die a very painful death. I think there's no question that rodenticides, many second-generation rodenticides, are inhumane. However, a lot of people have started paying attention, not so much because of the humaneness of rodenticides on rats and mice, but because they travel through the food chain, so the predators and the scavengers are being affected by this. And that's why a number of countries are now restricting or banning rodenticides, and we need an alternative. And this is without considering the fact that resistance is starting to grow towards rodenticides, which means they will not be as effective as before. And finally, culling can be unacceptable. Again, you will hear plenty about grey squirrels, mainly from several colleagues, in fact, and from Kay Ho in a talk later. But grey squirrels in the UK, again, they are not native. We have an estimate of 2.7 million of non-native grey squirrels and under 300,000 red. The red used to be 3.5 million, and the greys have kicked them out, partly because they are passing some diseases that are lethal to the red, but also there's a significant economic impact of grey squirrels on the timber industry. So it's both a conservation, so both environmental and economic impact. However, a survey done by social scientists suggests that out of almost 4,000 responders, 60% people were asked, what would you use to control grey squirrels? 60% rated contraception as acceptable, against 30% that rated trap and kill as acceptable. So I'm not saying this is right, but I'm saying this is what society wants. A few case studies, very, very quick examples, and then we'll delve into it later on fertility control. This is the first time that we used it in the UK. On captive wild boar, we had 12 animals treated and 12 controls. The controls reproduced happily, and only one of the 12 treated reproduced again. So we had 11 out of 12 sows, females, that did not reproduce for at least 4 to 6 years, after which we stopped the project after a single injection of a contraceptive vaccine. Now, injection obviously means that you have to capture animals. We'll discuss this later. We didn't find any effect on physiology, on behavior, and on welfare. The second case study is a case study about a population. So this is a colleague of mine, Dave Cowan, went to Wales. There was a small population of Kashmiri goats, and they vandalized garden, they were in poor health, they damaged plant community, people didn't like their flowers to be eaten. However, they're iconic. Tourists go to the area to see these goats. So culling was not on the cards at all. And the council started to translocate and adopt out these goats. There are only so many goats that you can adopt out before your market is saturated. And so they went in 1 or 2 doses of an injectable, again contraceptive, reduced the reproduction by 83–92% for 4 years. So that was a very exciting study about field application on a population in the UK. This was in Wales. This is a study that I conducted in Hong Kong with colleagues from Hong Kong. Very similar to the goats. If you think about the goats, these were cattle. Feral cattle are walking all around Hong Kong. They cause traffic accidents, they cause several problems. However, they are part of the cultural heritage of Hong Kong. So culling, again, no go. So we went in and we injected these animals with 2 injections, one and then another within 6 to 1 year. And we significantly reduced reproduction for about 3 years. And this made us think we could think about applications to free-living horses, ponies, cattle, rewilding projects that are popping up in many parts of Europe and, in fact, in the world. This is an important case study. Possums, I know we don't have many possums in Europe, but the take-home message from here is that these researchers looked at the transmission of the bacterium Leptospira in possum. They surgically sterilized possums and they let them go. And they looked at the proportion of animals that were infected if they were sterilized or they were intact. And they found that obviously fertility control will induce less frequent mating contacts. And so there was a reduction of disease transmission without having to reduce the population. And I'll not dwell on this because Marco Pellizzari will talk about it a lot. So we have 2 colleagues here that can talk for you about nicarbazine and the use of nicarbazine for pigeon population, pigeons around the world. So my last slide, why should we invest in fertility control? Why I'm hoping that all of you will push for people to consider at least fertility control. As people and wildlife are sharing more and more space and resources, we need alternatives and we are running out of options. So there is growing demand that is undeniable for non-lethal methods. The lethal control can be inefficient, can be harmful, can be illegal. You can go and shoot animals in a city, for instance. We will see later some examples of modeling that suggest that fertility control could help in reducing wildlife numbers. Translocations, we can talk about it for an hour if you want. Translocation of problem animals are not a good idea. They don't solve the problem, they are a quick fix, and they might do more bad than good. Fertility control may reduce disease transmission, and finally, fertility control can promote wildlife stewardship. We have been told by several people that they'd rather use fertility control and contraceptives compared to culling. So thank you very much. I would be happy to answer any questions. No question? Wonderful. One question, two questions, okay? Okay, Martin and then Dan.
Yeah, I wonder, you talked about 20 death victims through vehicle-deer collisions in the UK. Might it be that those are only the confirmed ones, like somebody might steer to avoid a collision and then run into a tree and die?
Sorry, the question is about traffic accidents.
Yeah.
Yes, so that's a very good point. So yes, the number of people affected is not only the one that actually crash against the deer, is also the one that turn quickly and crash against the tree. Thank you very much for making it absolutely. So it's much higher. In fact, the impact is much higher. Steve?
What is the primary source of pushback? You said that hunters are decreasing the number, and that would be people who might want to get involved in culling. But is there a primary source of opposition to fertility control that you're aware of? It seems like such a good thing, and we're all here to agree with that. But where is the pushback coming from?
A lot of pushback from various quarters. One group is hunters. Hunters are still convinced, and I have nothing against hunters also. Hunters, many hunter groups are still convinced that they hold the truth. And so they are the ones that should manage population. But also hunters have a very good point, which we will hopefully touch on. They would say, if you inject an animal and then I eat it, what happens to me? So that's one of the issues that we'll discuss. Some people, so on the other spectrum, other side, suggest that who are we to have the right to stop animals from reproducing? And there's no point in telling these people, a lot of people are taking the pill, and they will say, well, that's their choice. So I also said, well, a lot of people spay and neuter their cats and dogs. So cats and dogs should not be treated differently. So there are pushback. Also, there's a tradition in many parts of the world that hunting or culling will solve the problem. Sometimes I start this talk by saying 300 years ago when I started in this job, we used to talk about wildlife management. Then that became human-wildlife conflicts, so with a accent on human. Then it became human-wildlife interactions, and now is human-wildlife coexistence. And the coexistence is the romantic side. It's a very good point, but could be also seen as a romantic side of, which is why we will hear about rewilding also, and how difficult it has been even for us to convince somebody from the rewilding community to come and speak to what if you are so successful, then there are too many animals. What happens then? Many don't want to consider that. Audrey? Somebody tell me when I have to shut up, please.
Thanks, Giovanna. I think we all know that the elephant in the room is reproduction, human reproduction and space. And so certainly I think one of the things that's missing from here is that fertility control actually issues the root cause of the problem, which is reproduction. And of course we can't say that it's human reproduction, but we can say that it's animal reproduction, and so that therefore it controls growth rates. And so certainly it controls local densities of animals. And I think that's quite a critical context, because it depends obviously on the species and on the objectives, but the beauty of the methodology is that you can tailor-make it to address those circumstances. But I think that's something that is missing here, is that it solves the root cause of the problem that we can address apart from conflict for resources and habitat loss, etc., as opposed to some of the other options that are on the table. I think that's a really important argument that people neglect to think about.
Thank you. Thank you very much. By the way, Audrey Delsing, if anybody's interested in elephant management, Audrey is your man or woman.